I'm going to start as Muslims do in the name of God. In Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah amma ba'd. Brothers, sisters, friends, and foes, may the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. The God delusion or solution. This resonates with regards to one of the founders of the neo-atheist movement book, publication called The God Delusion, which was written by Richard Dawkins. And essentially he argues that God is a delusion. We have no good reasons to believe in the existence of a God. So I'm going to argue today that we have very good reasons to believe in the existence of God. And I'm going to do that by posing two arguments. Number one, God makes sense of the origins of the universe. And number two, God makes sense of the fine-tuning of the universe to permit our existence. So let's go straight to the first argument. God makes sense of the origins of the universe. Now, brothers, sisters, and friends, we have all asked the same questions. Why does the universe exist? Where did it come from? Why does something exist rather than nothing? The famous German polymath Leibniz, he said in one of his essays, the first question that we should ask and that must be answered is, why does something exist rather than nothing? This is why the Quran, which is the book of the Muslims, also states, do they think the universe came out of nothing? Now we could respond to this perennial question by positing a cause for the universe or claiming that the universe is uncaused. Well, let's take the atheist conclusion, which generally is that the universe is a brute fact. For example, Bertrand Russell, the famous atheist philosopher, he said in the 1960s on a radio program, the universe is just there and that's all. It's a brute reality. But if that is the case, that would imply and indicate that the universe is eternal. And if the universe is eternal, it would mean that the universe has an infinite history of past events. Now, let's question this. Can there be an infinite number of anything in the real world? Well, from a philosophical position, it doesn't make sense. It leads to absurdities. As the philosophers say, there is no ontological export of the concept of the infinite into the real world. Now let me give you some examples for you to understand this better. Imagine we have an infinite number of Richard Dawkins in this room, okay? And say I took 10 Richard Dawkins away. How many Richard Dawkins do we have left? Infinity or infinity minus 10. Whatever position we take, we should practically be able to count how many Richard Dawkins there are in this room, but we can't. It leads to absurdities. Another example. Imagine there are 100 Richard Dawkins in this room, and at every possible moment, I add another Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins 101, Richard Dawkins 102, Richard Dawkins 1,000,001, and so forth. Will I ever reach a number of Richard Dawkins which we can describe as infinite? No, because we could always add another Richard Dawkins. So what does this say to us? This says to us that the infinite in the real world doesn't exist. In the mathematical realm of discourse, it exists because it's based on certain axioms and conventions. But in the real world, it simply doesn't exist. This is why mathematicians Kasman and Newman, they said the infinite certainly does not exist in the same sense that we say there are fish in the sea. Also, the famous German mathematician David Hilbert, he said the infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. It neither exists in nature nor provides a legitimate basis for rational thought. The role that remains for the infinite to play is solely that of an idea. But brothers, sisters, and friends, events are not just ideas, they are real things. Therefore, the number of events in the universe cannot be infinitely long. They must be finite. And that would indicate that there must have been a beginning to the universe. And if the universe had a beginning, therefore it must have a cause. Now this is supported by scientific evidence, astrophysical evidence. Has everyone heard of the Big Bang? Put your hands up. Good, and it's not that thing that happens after too many curries, okay? Now the Big Bang, also known as the hot standard model, states that physical time and space were created and matter and energy were created at a point that cosmologists call singularity. Now, according to John Boslow, the author of Stephen Hawking's universe, he says, the biggest misunderstanding about the Big Bang is that it began as a lump of matter somewhere in the void of space. And he says, it was not just matter that was created during the Big Bang, it was space and time that were created. So in the sense that the time has a beginning, space also has a beginning. So Big Bang cosmology indicates that the universe began to exist. But from a naturalistic perspective, if our methodology is very crude and we're just a naturalist, that would mean that the Big Bang would imply that the universe was created out of nothing, ex nihilo. But we know there is an undeniable philosophical principle that out of nothing, nothing comes. It is no wonder P.J. Swart in his publication about time says, if there is anything we can find inconceivable, it is that something could arise from nothing. Let me summarize the first argument for you. 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. So it logically follows that the universe has a cause, which makes it a sound and valid argument. However, all we know from this is that there is a cause for the universe. We can't claim it's Jesus. We can't claim it's Buddha. We can't claim it's Allah. We can't claim it's Richard Dawkins. Okay? The god of neo-atheism. We can't claim it's anyone. However, upon conceptual analysis, which basically means, let's think hard about this thing. Upon conceptual analysis, we can conclude that this cause has the basic attributes of a monotheistic God. Let me explain why. Now, since this cause created time and space, it must be one. Because if we follow the philosophical principle Occam's razor, which states that we shouldn't posit multiple causes beyond necessity, then we should stick to the most simplest explanation, which is one. If we claim this cause is 365, then it creates more questions than it answers. Also, this cause must be uncaused, because we've already discussed the absurdity of an infinity, which includes the absurdity of an infinite regress of causes. Also, this cause must be immaterial and transcendent. Let's think about this, because since this cause created time and space, it must therefore transcend time and space. In other words, this cause exists atemporally and non-spatially. So the logical conclusion from this is that the cause must therefore be immaterial, because material things exist within time and space. Significantly, this cause must have a will, which indicates it can have a relationship with personal agents in the universe. Now, why am I saying this? Because if this cause is uncaused, therefore eternal, and it produced an effect that is finite, such as the universe, it indicates it chose the universe to come into existence. And choice indicates a will, and having a will indicates that it can have a relationship with personal agents. And it is no wonder that the Quran, the book of the Muslims, has summarized this argument for us very eloquently. In the 112th chapter it says, say, He is God, the one, the only, God, the eternal, the absolute. He begets not, nor was he begotten, and there is none like unto him. Immaterial, transcendent. Now, before I go to the second argument, let me respond to some atheist counter-arguments to this argument so we can have more of a productive discussion in the Q&A. Now, one of the counter-arguments to this argument is about quantum physics, the quantum vacuum. Now, some physicists claim there are subatomic events that do not correspond with causality. They claim that subatomic particles behave unpredictably and spontaneously in the quantum vacuum. So they conclude that things begin to exist and they have no cause. They came from nothing. Let's respond to this in two ways. Firstly, the claim is very misleading because the vacuum is not nothing. It is a sea of fluctuating energy. It has a rich structure that obeys the laws of the universe. So it is something. The second way we could respond to this is by saying that there are many physicists that are adopting a deterministic view of events in the quantum vacuum. For example, David Bohm's interpretation being one of them. Physicists are moving away from the Copenhagen interpretation, which indicates that things are just spontaneous and unpredictable. So it's not a valid counter-argument to our argument here. The other argument, which is a very outdated atheist cliche in my opinion, is, well, who created God then? Who created that cause? Now, we have to be attentive to the argument. We're saying here whatever begins to exist as a cause, not all things that exist have a cause. There is a big difference, and God never began to exist. Also, the question itself denies our very existence. It means that there is no universe at all. Because if we say what caused the cause that caused the universe, then what stops us from saying what caused the cause that caused that cause that caused the cause that caused the universe? But then what stops us from saying then what caused the cause that caused that cause that caused that cause that caused that cause that caused that cause that caused the universe? If we do this ad infinitum, would we have the universe today? No. So the question itself denies our very existence. Also, another counter-argument is that causality doesn't make sense out of time. So we can't even say there's a cause for time and space. This is inaccurate because there is no philosophical consensus on the description of causality. So we go to the basic description, which is something which produces an effect. And also, time is not a necessary factor for causality. The philosophers have argued that there is a concept of causality called simultaneous asymmetric causation, which the cause is prior causally, but not prior temporally. Let me give you an example. Try and push your elbow into a pillow. Which comes first in time? The movement or the indentation once you're touching the pillow? Well, we know it's prior causally, but maybe not prior temporally. So the idea that causality doesn't make sense out of time doesn't make sense. Let's go now to the second argument. God makes sense of the fine-tuning of the universe to permit our existence. And I love this argument because we have a lot of laughs. As you Irish say, we have a good crack. Okay? Now, how do we explain the order in the universe and the apparent fine-tuning of the cosmos to permit life, our own existence? Surely to claim that they exist without any reason is absurd. This is why Professor Roger Penrose, he states, there is a certain sense in which I would say the universe has a purpose. It's not there just somehow by chance. Some people take the view that the universe is there and it runs along. It's a bit as though it's just sort of computes and we happen by accident to find ourselves in this thing. I don't think that's a very fruitful or helpful way of looking at the universe. Because, brothers, sisters and friends, it seems more likely that a universe to prohibit life should exist rather than one that should permit life. Now, why do I say this? I'm saying this because the existence of life in this very universe depends on a conspiracy of initial conditions and constants that must have been fine-tuned to a degree that is literally incomprehensible. Let me give you some examples into consideration. Example number one, the expansion rate of the universe. Now, if the expansion rate of the universe differed by more than 10 to the power of minus 18 seconds, which is 1 quintillionth of a second, there would have been no universe. Even Stephen Hawking, in his publication, A Brief History of Time, he acknowledges the extraordinary equilibrium in the rate of expansion. He says, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, the universe would have recollapsed before it ever reached its present size. Example number two. This is about low entropy. Professor Roger Penrose of Oxford University, he states, in order to produce a universe resembling the one in which we live, the creator would have to aim for an absurdly tiny volume of the phase space of possible universes. You may not know what I'm talking about, but let's question, what is this volume? Well, according to Penrose, this volume is 1/10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. Now, you may not be mathematical geniuses, so let me give you a practical example of what this really means. Imagine I'm holding a dart. This is my dart. Oops. And I want to hit the center of a proton. If the universe was my dartboard, that is the implications of this fine-tuning. Now, there are three possible explanations for this fine-tuning. One, physical necessity. It's just there. Two, chance. Or three, design. And let's work our way together through this. First and foremost, it can't be physical necessity because these values are not contingent. They're not dependent on the laws of nature. Also, it requires us to believe, brothers, sisters, and friends, that a universe not fit for life would have been impossible. But if any of these constants and values were changed even by a hair's breadth, the universe would not permit life. This is why scientist Paul Davies, he says, it seems then that the physical universe does not have to be the way it is. It could have been otherwise. So we know physical necessity is not a good explanation. What about chance? Well, I don't think chance is a rational explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe to permit our existence. Because the chances of the initial conditions for the universe to be life-permitting are so unlikely that it would be impossible to use this as a sufficient explanation for the origins and for the universe to permit our existence. Now some people say, but there could still be a chance. But this is very problematic. It's counter-discourse. Because I could say, well, you know what? I don't believe my mother anymore. I think she's a grey rhino that was born on Pluto and flew here on a pint of Guinness. Now you may say to me, Mr. Tzortzis, that's highly absurd and irrational. Then I would reply, but there's a chance. So the point is counter-discourse is counterproductive. But also, would such people say such a thing if they saw an elephant that appeared in the driveway overnight? Or a jumbo jet was parked in their front garden? Of course not. However, brothers, sisters, and friends, it's not just about chance. It's something called specified probability, which means that an event is not only improbable, but it conforms to an independent discovered pattern, which makes the chance hypothesis irrational and beyond comprehension. Let me give you an example. Imagine we had a chimpanzee right here, okay? Looks like me. And we're typing away continuously. And say he does this for the whole day, 24 hours, and you come back and he's sleeping with all banana skins everywhere, and you see printed out, oh Romeo, wherefore art thou, O Romeo? Deny thy father and deny thy name. A Shakespearean play. Now, what would you conclude? You would say, I would have assumed maybe it could have produced something like this, the, end, car, house, tree, Richard Dawkins. Because it's grammarless. But because it conforms to an independent pattern of the English grammar, then you know this is beyond probability. And there was a study done on a Horizon program, and it concluded that if you left a chimpanzee to type away on a typewriter or computer, do you know how long it would take them to write to be or not to be from Hamlet's play? Someone guess.
A day.
A day? Okay. Yourself? Anyone?
A year.
A year? Well, think about this. 28 billion years. It would take mathematically 28 billion years. How old is the universe?
14 billion.
About 14 billion years. So in a way, to adopt the chance hypothesis is actually denying the universe's existence. Therefore, we have sufficient reasons to believe that the universe is designed, because it's the best explanation from an inference perspective. Let me summarize this for you. 1. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to physical necessity, chance, or design. we now know it's not due to physical necessity or chance. 3, therefore is due to design. Now, let me respond to some atheist counter-arguments to this, because I really want to have a positive discussion today. I don't want a repetition of outdated atheist cliches. The first one is the anthropic principle, and this is the contention. Atheists would say, we shouldn't be surprised that the universe is life-permitting because we are here to observe a life-permitting universe. This is true, but the claim is false. Take the following into consideration. Imagine my back is against the wall and every single one of you are trained marksmen. And you have lasers on my forehead and at my heart. And then you hear, I'm alive. I'm alive. Now, let me explain what I'm trying to say here. You shouldn't be surprised that you're not dead. You shouldn't be surprised that you're not dead, because you wouldn't be able to observe the fact that you're dead anyway. But you should be surprised that you're alive, based upon the improbability of all of you guys missing. There's a conflation of two statements here. This is why the anthropic principle doesn't make sense. Oh, it's finished now? Okay, I'm rounding up. Also, we have the final contention, which is the multiverse theory. There's many worlds hypothesis. Scientists such as Vilenkin suggest there's an infinite ensemble of simultaneous universes. But there's a couple of problems here. Firstly, you have to claim that the infinite actually exists in a practical, physical world, and it doesn't. So therefore, it takes the infinite world ensemble and it demolishes that counter-argument. Also, if we adopt Occam's razor, which is the simplest explanation, the best explanation, then having an infinite bloated set of universes is far more complex than a designer. This is why scientist John Polkinghorne, he says, people try to trick out a many universe account in sort of pseudo-scientific terms, but that is pseudo-science. I'm going to leave the other very funny Richard Dawkins counter-argument, which I believe is equivalent of the intellectual capacities of a 7-year-old. And we're all going to have a laugh during the Q&A. Who wants to have a laugh?